All right, so today we're going to be talking about how we can take form data, turn that into a table display, and also export it as a CSV file. So this is kind of a basic, simple spreadsheet type layout. So we've got this form with a few fields. When the user clicks on save, we're going to add rows to this table down here. We're going to add the ability to double click on one of the table cells and edit the data that's inside there and update our stored data. And then clicking on the export button is going to be able to take all of this data and turn it into an actual CSV file that the user can then download. So the export button is going to save the data and trigger the download. All right, so let's take a look at this. In the HTML, very simple layout. We've got a form element with those 4 fields that we saw at the top: fname, lname, email, and username. Just simple basic data. Our save button, and then below we've got a T head and a T body. So in the head, those are the headings. In the body, this is where we're going to put the data. So it's going to look something like this. There's going to be a TR with 4 cells. And inside of here, we're also going to add some data properties. So I'm going to add one in here, like this, data row, that gives me an indication which row it is. So when the user clicks on one of these cells to edit, we'll know what row in the table they're editing. And inside of each one of these, we'll add a data call property. So we'll say, okay, this is column 0, and this one is column 1, just like that. And we can also, if we want, do something to indicate what the name or ID is. We've got the same name and ID on each one of these inputs. I'll show you why in just a moment. But down in here, we could have a data name property where we take the name of what it is that we're saving, something like this. So if you do want to save that data in a file later on, we can do that. All right, that's what we're going to build. So let's jump into the script. I have the basic shell structure of what we're going to do. So the function names are already there with some comments inside them and a couple lines of code, not a lot. When the page loads, we're going to call our init function, and we're just going to add the listeners. Inside of here, I'm going to put a submit listener on the form element. That's going to call my function to save the data. This is the one that's going to gather all the data from the form, and this is going to be why we use the name attribute as well as the ID. The export button is going to call a function and clicking on one of the table cells. So we're going to take the T body because we only want to have one click listener for the entire area with all the data. So the T body is the parent of all the TDs. It's the parent of the TRs, but also the TDs. So this is going to be what we use as our trigger to call our function to edit the data. All right, so save data. We'll start with that. User is going to be filling this out, clicking on the save button, or because we're using the submit listener on the form, I can also hit the enter key, and that's going to submit this form. So inside of here, we have our EV, our event object. This is the submit event, gets passed down to this function. So form add event listener submit, EV is the submit event. Prevent default stops the page from reloading. Very important with the submit event. Anytime you're dealing with a form object and the submit event, if you want to do some processing on that and handle the data other than having the page sent to whatever the action in the form element is, you need to call the EV prevent default. So the target of the event, that is the form, this thing right here, and we're going to create a form data object. Now we could create an empty form data object and then append each of the 4 values in the order that we want, but you can, if you want, just pass in the form object. So this form right here from our HTML, if any element has a name attribute, it will be included in that form object that gets passed into form data. If the name elements are missing, those values do not get passed in. So that's very important to remember. If you don't have the names, this is going to give you nothing. So we have now the form data, and we're going to pass it on to these other functions. We want to call the cache data to save the data. We're going to call build row to build the row in the table. So app.cache data, and we'll pass in our form data object that we created, And then we'll do the same thing here, app.buildRow. This is to update the table display. There we are. Now, once that's done, I'm assuming at this point that we've done all the work that we need to do with the form data. So I want to clear out the form, and I want to put the focus back into the first input, the first name field. So we can do that. We can say form.reset. That'll put it back to whatever the value of the form was when the page loaded. And we can also select that first name field. So get element by ID, fname was the first name field, and we'll focus on that. So these last two steps aren't something that you have to do to make this work, but if I'm filling this in, putting in values through all of these fields, when I hit enter to submit the form, it's nice for the user if this gets cleared out and the focus and the caret gets put back into that first field. It just makes the data entry a lot easier for the user. It's a better user experience. And that's what our last two lines are going to be. Now, cache data. We want to save the 4 values from here. And I have a global property inside my app object called data. This is where I'm going to save all that information from the form data object. So inside of here, we want to extract from the form data, and we'll update app.data. That's going to be, well, actually, sorry, it's just one row that we're adding here. And this is an array, so I'm going to call push. What I want to put inside of there is an array of values. So array from, and form data, this isn't an array itself, it is an actual kind of object. It is a form data object. So we have to call one of the methods on the form data object, and values, not value, but values, that will give us an array of the 4 values from the 4 inputs. So it just goes to each of the 4 things inside the form data object, gives us only the values, not the IDs or the names, but just the values. And really, that's going to be what we want when we build our CSV, our comma-separated value file. And just to take a look here, console.table, we'll take a look at app.data at that point. All right, so let's open up our console so we can take a look. There we are. So let's do this, Sam Winchester. I hit enter. And there we are. There are the 4 values in the first row of that thing. So I'm using console.table because it's an array, I can display it. Or it's a 2-dimensional array, I can display it as a table. So that's what I'm doing here. Those are the 4 values that we just saved inside of app.data. Now, we're going to do the same idea as this, but we want to write them out as a row in the table. That's our build row function. Passing in the same form data object, we're going to find that table body. I used a big selector here. I could have just done display tbody or just tbody. There's only one on the page, but just to be more specific, I'm going to create a brand new table row, and I want to add that row counter, the one that we were talking about back here. In the table, as we're building it, we want to add this in each row. So I need to know how many rows I have. So we're going to call setAttribute, and we're going to be building that table row. The value that we're going to put inside of here, if I find document query selector inside my tbody element, the only one on the page, tr, that's going to find the first one. Query selector all is going to find all of them. If I find the length of that, that will tell me how many rows there are. So if there are currently 0, now that is going to give me the number. It doesn't matter that I've already created this first one. It doesn't exist inside of the tbody yet. So the length is going to be the value of this. And it doesn't matter if this is a number or a string, because once it goes into here, it's going to become a string. All right, now, every time we do this, we're going to be setting the column number to 0. So we'll create that as a starting point. And now I want to loop through the form data object, this thing right here. Now form data, any form data object has those methods. We've got values that we used up here. There's keys, which will give us just the fname, lname, email, and username. But I want both. I want the key and the value, just because I'm going to put it inside of my TD cell. So I'm going to call entries. This is going to give me an array with two things. The first thing is going to be the key. The second thing is going to be the value. And I can do a for of loop to loop through this, because formData.entries gives us an iterator that we can use with a for of loop, just like this. There we go. So let entry of form data entries. Form data entries gives me an array. It gives me the first array. And we're going to loop through that one, and we're going to set the inner HTML, which is currently empty. We could be specific here. We'll say inner HTML is equal to an empty string currently, and we're going to say plus equals. So we're going to add to that inner HTML. We're going to add to that, and this is going to be our TD. We need data call. And inside of here, we're going to put our variable for the call number inside there. And then our additional one that we were talking about, we'll have it here just in case. I'm not going to be actually using it for any of my code, but we'll put it there just as an example. I want to have inside here my entry number 0. That is the key. So entry right here. This is the first value, so this will be the key that's returned. So it'll be fname or lname. The first column is going to be fname, the second one will be lname, and then email, and then username. So we have that. This is our whole TD, and inside the value that we want to put, this will be our entry number 1. So that is the actual value. All right, so we're looping through, we're doing all that, and to increment our column number, we have to do this. We have the whole thing. Once we're done looping through that, then we have to add it to the tbody. tbody.append our new tr. Okay, so let's try this again. There we go. So we have this added into our app.data object, and we've built a row in our table, and we can continue to do that. We can continue to add more and more rows. There we are. And we can keep going, and you can see app.data has 2 rows. Our table has 2 rows. All right, next up, we want to be able to export this to actually create the file. So that's our export data function. This is the one that gets called when the user clicks on the export button. So down here, app.data, I'm going to add onto there the very first row that's going to be inside of there. This, now, by adding this onto the beginning of app.data, I am updating that global data. And if I do the export twice, it means the second time I do this, it's going to have these entries 2 times. So it would be better if we copied app.data and then added this to the copy of that. Just keep that in mind. I'm just going to skip over that and say I'm only exporting 1 file. So we're adding this to the beginning of app.data. This data right here, we're adding a row on the top of that. We want to convert the app.data array into a series of strings. I don't want to just call json.stringify, because then I'm actually going to have those square brackets inside of there, and it's not going to work as a CSV file. CSV files can't have the square brackets. It's got to be just string, 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 string with, or numbers with commas in between them, and ideally quotation marks around each one of the values, kind of like this without the square brackets. That's what we have to do. So we're going to loop through what we have here. I've got a starter string that I'm going to create and append to, just like the inner HTML for the table. We're going to do this, and then we're going to loop through app.data. For each, we will look at each one of the rows inside of our array. So we've put this on to the beginning. We're going to loop through this and all the other rows of data. So looping through, this is going to be a row like this. And our string, we're going to just append to that the result of doing a map.join.concat. The join is going to say, hey, what do you want to put between each one of the values? Well, I need a comma. I can do a comma and a space if I want, or just a comma. And the concat is, what do you want to have at the end? So join is going to take all of these and put the 3 commas inside of there. And then concat, we're going to take that string, and at the very end of it, I need to add a new line character. So I'm going to do that. Inside the map, this is where we take our values and turn them into strings wrapped in quotation marks. So let's call it call, and we're going to return json.stringify. If I could spell that, of that call value. So call is going to be first name, then last name, then email, then username. So I'm going to take that, and just in case there's quotation marks or other special characters inside there, we stringify it, which will take whatever's there, turn it into a string, and put quotation marks around it. So when you take a string and you stringify it, you get the quotation marks put in. Then we put the commas between each one of them. Then we add the new line character at the very end, and that is going to be the actual string that we want to put into the CSV file. So what am I going to call it? Data export plus a timestamp plus .csv. So I'm always going to have a unique file name because I'm doing this timestamp. You can call it anything that you want. That's just the name that I'm using here. So file, we will create a new file, and it's going to take an array of data, and what you put inside of here is completely up to you, but it can be a string. In this case, it's this string that we created. That is the contents for my file. What do I want to call it? Well, the file name that I just made up. And the third option is the type, and it is text/CSV. Now, if you're looking for more details about working with files, if you look up there at the top, you'll find a little card linking to a playlist that I did about videos and blobs and strings and all kinds of stuff like that, typed arrays. All right, our last step, we've created the file. Now I need an anchor tag that links to the file that I just created and lets the person download it. So create an anchor the same way you would for any web page. Document create element A. The href is going to be a pointer to this file, which is just sitting in memory. So it's an actual file object, but it's just sitting in memory. There's a built-in create object URL method, and you can pass a blob. A file is a kind of blob. So we're going to pass that to here, and we're going to get a URL that points to the location in memory where that file is saved. Download, that's going to be the file name. So we're adding a download attribute to the anchor tag, and the value of it should be the file name that the user is going to get to save. They can change the name if they want, but a.click. So HTML elements have a click method, not just a click event, but a click method that simulates clicking on them. There we go. So save that. We'll come back here. We'll enter some data. There's our data. And I will click on export. There we go. And we save. And there we have it. We have saved a CSV file. If I click on that, it will open up with my default program for working with CSV files, which happens to be numbers, and there it is. This is an actual CSV file opened in numbers. There's the headers that we inserted, and there's the 2 rows of data. All right, last step in this whole process was to be able to edit, and that's just a few lines of code. So we want to jump back in here in our edit cell function. So this is called when we double click. If I go back up to my add listeners function. So when somebody double clicks on the T-body, we're going to call edit cell. And EV is the event object. I'm going to find the TD that they clicked on. So cell is going to be EV target closest. This method finds the closest match for whatever CSS selector you put here. I'm assuming they've clicked in a TD. If there is no TD that is a parent of what is clicked on, this will give us nothing, which is why we have the if statement here. I'm going to find out the row. So I will go, actually these 2 lines, what I'll do is I'll just move them down inside of here. Don't have to do anything else if it wasn't a TD. Once we have the cell, go to its parent, which should be a TR, get the data row value, and here I'm doing the unary plus operator to convert this value from the attribute, which is a string, into a number. And I do the same thing with the cell's own data call attribute. So I've got the row and the column. That tells me the position in the array where I'm going to be editing these things. All right, so we have our cell, the one that they clicked on. I want to make it editable. And thankfully, in HTML5, all we have to do is change one property. Content editable. Now, this doesn't work on absolutely everything, but on most elements it does. That makes it editable. The person can actually start to type and change the content there. Now, I do want to focus on there. So when they double click, it's just going to sort of highlight and select the whole thing. I want to focus. That's going to put the text caret inside of there. And we'll save our text. We'll say, okay, let the text equal cell.text content. That is the actual content. So that basically has made the cells editable. User can then start to type. They can change the content of what's inside there. I need to wait for the person to finish typing. The way that I know that they're done is they hit the enter key. That's what we're going to take as our trigger. So we will say cell add event listener. We're going to listen for the key down event every time a key is pressed. We're going to create a function called save. I could do this separately. I'm just going to embed it inside of here. So when the person hits the enter key, that's when I want to save. So I need to check and see, okay, this event is the key down event. So if event.key is the word enter, or ev.code equals enter. So one of those 2 things should be equal to enter. Person's typing, they hit enter. Then we can say, you know what? Now you can no longer edit this thing. So we'll set it to false. There we have it. And we're going to remove the event listener for this thing. Need a period there. Remove. There. So that is going to say, basically, stop listening for the key down event on this cell. I don't need this function anymore. It can be thrown away. I don't need it. And the app.data array, that's what we're going to update. So inside of there, the row that we're going to update, the call that we're going to update, we got those 2 values right up here. So whatever row, whichever column, that's the one that we're editing inside of here, and that's going to be equal to the new value of cell.text content. And we may as well at this point console log table take a look, not log, but console table, the value of app.data, so we can see that we have actually made the changes in there. All right. that's it. We now have basically a spreadsheet. So I can edit these. I'm going to double click on this one. Hit enter. It's saved. And if I squish this over a little bit, we can see, yes, Winchester, it was saved. Double click on this one. Hit enter. There we go. We've saved it. And we can export it. And we have now the updated version. And there it is, with the latest values. And that's it. That is turning a web page form into data collection that you can then turn into a table's display worth of data, and also the ability to edit that data and export it as a CSV file. So hope that helps you out. Hope you find that useful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. I answer whatever I have time for. And as always, thanks for watching.